This again is the first of our fall webinar series. So Marisa, I will introduce in a moment, but just so you have it on your agendas, radars, we have three more seminars this fall or webinars this fall. The next is October 30th with Tim Myhook, our associate director based at SUNY Plattsburgh, talking about fishhook water fleas. In November, we're moving away from the last Wednesday of the month to avoid holidays, but we will have Montana Bailey, who's talking about harmful algal blooms and transboundary Lake Champlain. And then December 11th, Carol Adair from UVM will be talking about warming winters and nutrient export to the lake. So hopefully you can join us for those webinars. And then let me introduce Marisa, who is today's speaker. So she's going to be speaking about her thesis, her recently defended master's thesis from Creek to Career, exploring the impacts of watershed education internship opportunities on career pathways. Marisa, in addition to working on her research that has focused on this topic, the impacts and career transformations of undergraduate internships, where the interns were serving as watershed educators, she also worked to support our Lake Champlain Sea Grant and UVM Extension's Watershed Alliance. It's a kindergarten to 12th grade and teacher education program. And Marisa worked to provide education to youth and teachers and also supported our undergraduate interns. So I will stop sharing and I will turn it to Marisa.
Yeah, great. Let me just share my screen real quick.
And I can confirm for you if all right, I see your screen and
Are
I,
we
I do see your notes.
okay? Let me see if I can. Did that change?
That is good.
Okay,
Very good.
perfect.
All right.
Awesome. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Marisa Immordino. I am, well, hopefully a soon-to-be master's graduate of the Rubenstein School. Again, I defended like about 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to be talking about my master's thesis research today, which is titled From Creek to Career, Exploring the Impacts of Large Education Internships on Career Pathways. All right, so just to give just a brief overview on what we're talking about today before I jump into things. So the first part of this presentation is going to be my literature review. I'll discuss a little bit about internships, environmental education, as well as science outreach internship roles. And then after that, I'll get into the actual body of research. So I'll introduce my research questions, talk about some of the methods, and then the results and discussion sections. So to just jump right into things, so what exactly is an internship? So I've gone ahead and compiled just a couple of definitions from the literature here. So some authors argue that it is an important experience for those looking for jobs after graduation. Others say that it's more like a part-time role that encompasses many different academic interests, that kind of thing. My personal favorite on here, a bridge between college and the working world. And then, of course, from a more organizational standpoint, allowing organizations to bring on inexperienced individuals for career development. Now, for the purpose of this research today, I've opted to craft my own definition based on these, as well as a couple others that I didn't put up on this slide. And it reads, an opportunity for an inexperienced student to learn about a career pathway that they are interested in. All right, so internships, of course, do have benefits, many benefits for participants. For starters, they are thought to increase marketability and employability of those who participate. This is in part because the student is being exposed to the working environment as well as being able to develop skills. In addition, some papers have said that higher job salary post-graduation has been reported in addition to academic improvement in future semesters. And then lastly, I alluded to this previously on the first bullet, but development of both soft as well as hard skills. So hard skills, not only those related to the industry the internship is in, but even soft skills like communication, problem solving, critical thinking, conflict management, skills that are applicable not only to the industry of the internship, but also to a wide variety of pathways, even outside of the industry the internship is in. Now, of course, there are some noted drawbacks of internship programs too. Lack of pay and or academic credit is one of the biggest ones. So students might feel financial instability when completing unpaid opportunities. They may have to take on one or two part-time jobs to support themselves. In addition, mental health concerns. So not only from that financial instability piece, but also just from the tasks of the internship. So an intern might be given a task that is more so meant for a more seasoned employee or someone that has been with the company for a full-time role. And then opposite of that, unmeaningful work assignments. So an intern might not be challenged enough in their program. They might be asked to say, get coffee or print paperwork, fact paperwork, that kind of thing. Now, pivoting away from internships for a bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about environmental education. So just to quickly define environmental education for all of you, environmental education, in essence, moves people to action through experiential connections, skills, and understanding of social and cultural connections to benefit the environment and humanity. Now, I want to focus particularly on teaching methods in environmental education, and they are quite diverse. Typically, though, environmental education is taught either informally or in non-formal settings, such as in the outdoors, or in the case of the example on the slide here, aboard a research vessel. Or it can be taught in more formal settings, such as in a traditional classroom. Now, both of these methods are effective. In fact, they are often used in combination with one another. However, informal education are thought to complement formal teaching experiences by exposing students to opportunities not easily found in the classroom. And again, I think this boat example that I have on the slide here is a good example of this because it'd be really hard to replicate this research vessel setting in a normal traditional classroom. In addition to this, informal education is also thought to enhance the dog's understanding of complex environmental issues and decision-making by putting them directly where the action is happening. So again, going back to that research vessel example, people are able to get out on the boat, work with real scientists, collect data in real time. Alrighty, and then last little slide on environmental education. I just want to briefly acknowledge the intertwined history between environmental education and water. So water and watersheds have been used historically as places of educational inquiry in environmental education curricula. And part of this is because of how important water is. There has been this continued importance of education to the public about water and water resources. As everyone here probably knows, water is life. Everyone who is on this call now, everyone who is living on Earth needs water to survive. Now, specifically, these watershed education styled programs are thought to not only be extremely effective in conveying knowledge, but in the case of the student perspective, inspiring water resources career pathways. All right, and then just to wrap up my literature review section next, I wanted to talk a little bit about some previous science outreach program research. So I found out pretty quickly when compiling this literature review 2 years ago that, to the best of my knowledge, there's not any research looking into the impacts of environmental education internships, particularly for the undergraduate student facilitators who are the interns. However, there is a decent amount of literature with science outreach program internships. So I thought to look into this to essentially establish a baseline to see what these students were reporting in these similar science outreach program internships. And there's quite a lot here. So most of the papers that I read were based on graduate student outcomes. For one of the papers, graduate students were able to improve their communication skills, improve their self-confidence, as well as their overall teaching abilities. In addition, the graduate students were appreciative of a break from their graduate student research, in addition to being able to communicate their science, their research, to an audience that they typically would be likely not to encounter, such as a K through 12 group of students. In addition, in another paper by Larson, graduate students reported entering career fields largely related to their outreach programs. So they were either entering fields related to education or staying in science. In terms of the education piece, they were either going into formal teaching career pathways like classroom teaching, or maybe even holding more informal education positions like extension or that kind of stuff at a university or college. Now, pivoting into undergraduates, there aren't all that many papers here, but one paper by Carpenter talked about how undergraduate students, after participating in a science outreach internship, reported gains largely in their academic career and personal lives, so impacts were focused along those three facets. In addition, another paper by Kohler talked about how students reported entering teaching careers post-internship, and they were able to discover teaching as an interest through participation in this internship. In general, career gains, anything revolving around careers, whether that was skills, pathways, etc., this was a pretty common thing among these papers, both in graduate students as well as undergraduate students. Now, pivoting away from my first chapter, I want to now talk about the body of research. So I'll first introduce my 3 research questions to all of you. So my first question asked what career trends persist in those who participate in these internship experiences. In other words, what types of jobs are alumni working post-internship? Where are they going? Are they working in education fields? Are they working in science, etc.? Second question asks, what impacts do alumni report as a result of participating in these opportunities? So not only overall impact of the internship, but again, those academic, personal, career impacts, as well as skill development too. And then lastly, the third question, to what extent do these internship experiences facilitate career pathway transformation in alumni? In other words, is the internship experience acting as a catalyst for changing career pathways in those that participate? And if the internship is changing those pathways, are the alumni attributing the change to participation in the internship? Getting into the methodology next. So before I discuss how I collected my data, I do want to talk a bit about the programs that I utilized for this research. Now, I knew prior to even starting my literature review that I'd be working with the Watershed Alliance program, but I did want to work with a couple of other programs in addition to Watershed Alliance. So I established a few parameters. For starters, I was looking for programs that were academic year based, so based in the fall and spring semesters. I didn't consider summer opportunities. In addition, I was looking for programs that were based at either a university or a college, and that the programs needed to employ undergraduate students as their primary educators or facilitators. But it was okay if there were full-time staff or graduate students on the teams in addition to the undergrads. In fact, all the programs had at least one additional staff member on their team. And then lastly, and probably the most important one on this list, the outreach that they focused on needed to be in watershed science education. So with that, I ended up locating 3 total programs, including Watershed Alliance. All were located in the northeastern corridor of the United States and are marked in various grayscale colored dots on this map here. The first of the programs, of course, is Lake Champlain Sea Grants Watershed Alliance. The second is ALARM, which stands for the Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring. And the third is Creek Connections. Giving just a little bit more information about those 3 programs. So Lake Champlain Sea Grants Watershed Alliance is based in the Lake Champlain Basin, both on the Vermont side of the lake at the University of Vermont, as well as the New York side at SUNY Plattsburgh. So interns here are known as watershed educators, and between 8 to 11 educators are hired for each academic year. I want to note too that it is not just all new hires each year, it is a mix of both new and returning hires. Their target audience for content is K-12 students and their teachers, and watershed educators will mostly focus on assisting with teaching lesson content with both full-time staff members as well as graduate students. Lessons themselves are based on 3 different programs. There is a fish dissection program, a stream monitoring-based program, as well as a research vessel-based experience program. The next program is ALARM. They are based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania at Dickinson College. So like Watershed Alliance, their outreach does expand well beyond the Carlisle area. In fact, this group works with most, if not all, of the state of Pennsylvania. Now, their interns here are known as watershed coordinators, and between 10 to 12 coordinators are hired for each academic year. Their target audience is adult community members. This group has a history of working with volunteer water monitoring groups. So coordinators will mostly assist with training events and outreach throughout the academic year to these volunteer groups. In addition, though, if an intern wants to specialize, they can either do laboratory work, technical assistance, or research-related tasks. And then lastly, we have Creek Connections, which is based in Meadville, Pennsylvania at Allegheny College. Again, like the 2 other programs, their outreach does expand well beyond Meadville. They have a sizable group of schools in the Pittsburgh area and have previously worked with schools in both Ohio and Michigan. Interns here are known as Creekers, and between 8 to 10 Creekers are hired for each academic year. Their target audience is K-12 students and their teachers, and Creekers will mostly assist with teaching lesson content throughout the school year, mostly based in stream side science. Now, they'll work with these schools throughout the school year. Schools will develop independent projects during this time and be able to present those projects at a research symposium that the Creekers have a pretty big hand in the planning of. Now getting into how I collected my data. So I collected data using a mixed methods approach. So I collected both qualitative as well as quantitative data. I first started with an online survey, which was distributed over Qualtrics between August of 2023 and September of 2023. Out of the 115 eligible alumni who received the survey, we had a 36% response rate or an N of 42. Now, by eligible alumni, I did end up surveying alumni only from graduation years between 2015 and 2023. This was chosen to account for program director consistency. So at the time that data was being collected, all the directors of their programs had been with their programs since 2015. Now, again, there were 20 total questions in this online survey, and the questions ranged in style and type. Some were more demographics based. So for instance, asking an alum when they started and completed their internship, both in the semester and the year. Others were Likert scale, so asking an alum to rank their experience levels in 4 related content areas prior to participation in the internship. And then lastly, some were open-ended or more qualitative. So an intern was asked to list 3 skills they were able to develop due to their internship. Once the survey closed in mid-September, all the data was imported into SPSS, which is a statistical analysis software where we analyzed it using descriptive statistics. In addition, I did run a couple of chi-square analysis tests too, though I'll get into that with the results. So in addition to putting out a survey, I also conducted several semi-structured interviews. So I conducted a total of 20 interviews between November of 2023 and January of 2024. These were conducted exclusively over Microsoft Teams, and the average interview time was about 22 minutes per interview. Now, there were a total of 10 questions in the interviews. These were grouped into 3 different blocks. The first block was based on pre-internship experiences. So for instance, asking an alum what led them to decide to intern with their program, what were their motivations. The second block was more like during internship activities, so asking about favorite parts, least favorite parts, etc. And then the third block was about post-internship activities. So asking about their career path, any academic impacts, and then most importantly, if they felt the internship had any impact on their career pathway and why or why not. Upon completion of an individual interview, the audio file of that interview was imported into Otter AI, which is a transcription software service where a transcript was generated. And then once all interviews were complete, these transcripts were then imported into NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis software to be analyzed qualitatively. Now, to talk a little bit about that analysis process for the qualitative data, I utilized something called thematic coding. So I essentially looked through all of the transcripts for any themes and trends that came up. I actually ended up going question by question. And I came up with a code book, and you can see the code books for these 2 questions on the side here. Now, coding was both inductive and deductive. Inductive, again, these just kind of emerged naturally from the transcripts, whereas deductive coding was based upon findings from previous research. So the career, personal, and academic codes that you see here were based upon findings from that Carpenter paper that I mentioned before. And then a similar process for the interviews as well. So again, mix of inductive and deductive coding. The deductive codes here, particularly the career clarification and the career reinforcement codes, were based upon previous findings from Lorson, a paper that I also mentioned earlier in the literature review section. All right, starting with the results now. So before I showcase a lot of the data, I did just want to briefly talk about just some of the demographics that I collected from the alumni. To start, here's a table that I made for the survey. So as you can see, we had a pretty equal number of responses from each of the 3 programs, again, for a total of 42. I also collected data for the average number of years since graduation. This was technically seen as graduation year, as well as the average number of semesters in internship. For the average number of years since graduation, the average was 4, and this was since 2020, from 2023. And then the average number of semesters internship was also 4, though, as you can see, it did vary by program. For instance, Pre-Connections alum tended to be with their program the longest at 7 semesters, while Watershed Alliance and Alarm alumni tended to be with their programs for just a little bit shorter of time. And then I did the same thing for the interviews as well. And most of the numbers here are the same with the exception of the average number of semesters in internship. So again, I did 20 interviews, tried to interview an equal number of people from each of the 3 programs, and ended up being 7 from Watershed Alliance, 7 from Creek Connections, and 6 from Alarm. Now, the only one that was different here in terms of demographics was the average number of semesters in internship. The average here was 5, so interviewees tended to be with their programs for slightly longer compared to those who just responded to the survey. All right. Getting into the results next. So I'm going to do this question by question. So these first couple slides will be based on that first question, talking about career trends. So overall, science and education careers were frequently mentioned in survey responses. This particular bar graph here comes from a survey question where I used U.S. Census category job occupations and had alumni select all occupations that applied that most closely resemble jobs they have worked since graduating with their bachelor's degrees. Now, these categories are broad, but I do want to pay particular focus to the top 2 here. So around 20% of alumni reported working in life, physical, and social science pathways, while 18% reported working in education, training, and library. And again, it's based on all jobs they have worked since graduating. It doesn't really tell me what they're doing currently. Again, these categories are also very broad, like physical and social science could mean a lot of things, as could a lot of the categories that you see on here. So in order to come up with more specific categories in the interviews, I ended up doing some thematic coding and to try and see what pathways alumni were following, what jobs they were working. So I had an interview question, I think I showed it on one of the other slides, where an alum was asked to recount their entire career pathway to me since they graduated with their bachelor's degree. And I ended up coming up with 4 different occupation categories. Again, these are a lot more specific compared to those census categories I showed you before. So the first one is education and outreach. So around 25% of alumni reported this as their most recent job. So all of these that you're about to see are based on the most recent occupation an alumni reported in their interview. Another 20% reported working in water-related fields, whether that was education or even science. And then 15% reported working in other careers. So this is just anything that's outside of education, water, and then our last category, which is science. So 5% of alumni reported working in science fields as their most current occupation. Now, there was a 5th category, and that was actually pursuing advanced degree. So around 30% of alumni that I interviewed reported being actively enrolled in either a master's or a doctorate degree program at the time of their interview. And again, it doesn't really count towards this occupation category, but I do think that it was interesting to include here that many were enrolled in graduate degree programs. Now, before I leave this slide, I do just want to talk briefly about this other careers category. So again, 15% of alumni reported being in occupations outside of education, water, and science. Though interestingly enough, a couple of alumni did mention wanting to return to those similar fields, depending on how things work out for them. So for instance, we had one alum from Creek Connections talk about how they were still interested in pursuing fishery, stream ecology, or education-related positions. They just haven't found a job in any of those areas yet. And then in addition, we had an alum from Watershed Alliance talk about how they have plans to get their master's in environmental education at some point in the future. All right, moving on to the second question. So talking about impacts. So this is based on a survey question where I asked about overall impact of the internship program. Alumni were asked to rank either no impact, a little impact, some, or significant impact in response to a multiple choice question. So as you can see from the pie chart here, 63% of alumni reported that the internship was significantly impactful on their lives post-graduation. Now, I mentioned in the methods section that I ran a couple of chi-square tests. I actually did that with this question. So I compared level of impact with a couple of those demographic variables that I discussed previously. And I found that there was no statistically significant relationship observed between the following demographic variables. Number of semesters in internships. So whether an intern for 2 semesters or 8 semesters, they generally reported the same level of impact. And the number of years since graduating was also, there was no statistically significant relationship with that either. In addition, class standing at the start of internships, whether they started as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and then also degree programs, whether they were environmental studies, environmental science, biology, etc. Now, the only demographic variable that did have a statistically significant relationship was class standing at the end of the internship. And this is interesting because 84% of alumni reported being seniors when they ended their internship program. Now getting into more specific impacts. So I first wanted to talk a little bit about some of the skills that alumni reported being able to develop as a result of the internship. I'm not going to discuss all of these, but I am going to discuss the first 2. So interpersonal skills were mentioned by 76% of respondents in their survey responses. And these can refer to communication skills, collaboration, leadership, facilitation, etc. And I have a couple of examples for each. So this alumnus talked about how they were able to develop lots of communication skills, not only with their peers, coworkers, and with the community, but also via multiple formats, such as written formats, as well as verbal formats. And then the other top skill was education and outreach skills. So these could refer to teaching or outreach skills, working with or training K-12 students or adult audience, etc. And this was mentioned by about 70% of alumni in their survey responses. And then this is probably one of my favorite quotes. So this is from a Creek Connections alumnus who talked about seeing the difference between a lecture and a hands-on activity when they were working for Creek Connections. And they asked themselves, why would anyone just do straight lectures? So this person noted in their interview that they were working as a professor as their most current role. So they try to bring this more experiential component to their lectures as often as they can. And then some of the other skills that alumni reported developing were in lab technical and research skills with 30%, There were also those who developed interpersonal skills, so self-confidence, personal growth at 27%, and then content knowledge, because these programs were very enriched in watershed science and education. A lot of alumni reported talking about different watershed science areas. So around 23% of alumni talked about those. And then in addition, again, I mentioned, so these career personal academic codes were based upon previous findings from that Carpenter paper. So interestingly enough, all alumni talked about career impacts in some sort of way in their survey responses. Again, this category is broad, but could refer to skill development, networking opportunities, post-internship jobs, career options, etc. So because everyone talked about it, I am going to showcase 3 different examples. So this alarm alumnus talked about how alarm introduced them to what a nonprofit does and the potential career paths that could lead from it. This Creek Connected alumnus talked about how the program taught them much about outreach, speaking, teaching, and being outdoors, aka skills that are not only applicable to the education and outreach fields, but also to a wide variety of career pathways. And then lastly, this Watershed Alliance alumnus talked about the career networking piece. So they were able to gain connections from a staff member who later connected them with potential employers. Now, I'll also briefly discuss the personal impacts. This can refer to enjoyment of experience, personal development, etc. It was mentioned by about 39% of alumni in their survey responses. And then just an example of that. So this Watershed Alliance alumnus talked about how it impacted the overall way they looked at the world, especially in terms of water. In addition, academic impacts came up less often at 16%, but that could refer to understanding of new science or education knowledge, or interest or continuation in future coursework and related studies. All right, and then getting into the last question next. So again, to what extent are these internship experiences to facilitate career pathway transformation in alumni? And overall, alumni did find that the internship impacted their career pathways, but pathway career impacts definitely varied from person to person. So I first want to discuss the direct career pathway benefits, so those who reported career pathway benefits in their interviews. So for one, career clarification and change, around 45% of alumni reported this in their interviews. So I have a couple of quotes that I'm going to showcase here. This Creek Connected alumnus, who at the time of their interview noted that their most recent job was an environmental education coordinator. They talked about how their internship not only led them directly to their position, thanks to their program director, but also just gave them the skills and connections they needed to do this job. So again, this person is directly attributing their internship experience to where they are working currently, what they're doing currently. In addition, we have another alarm alumnus at the bottom talking about how their whole career has been in the nonprofit sphere, and they likely would not have known to go down that path if not for alarm. So alarm exposed them to the nonprofit sphere and led them down that path. However, career clarification also worked in the opposite way. So it also allowed alumni to even rule out career options in addition to exposing them to new ones. So this Watershed Alliance alumnus talked about how even though they loved the educator aspect of the internship, they did learn that they were not cut out to be a teacher. And because of that, they ended up going down a research and consulting route rather than the educator route. All right. The other type of career impact that was reported was career reinforcement. So these were alumni that knew exactly what they wanted to do and were using the internship to simply reinforce their career interests. This was reported by around 30% of alumni. So this quote from a Watershed Alliance alumnus talked about how they realized that formal teaching was enjoyable to them. It felt very rewarding, and it reinforced that move into the education field for them. They knew that they always wanted to work in public schools, and though that's not where they started, they appreciated the opportunity to do that with Watershed Alliance without having a formal teaching degree. And this person at the time of their interview noted that their most recent occupation was an elementary school teacher. All right. So other alumni also reported career benefits. Not everyone reported direct career pathway benefits. Not everyone reported direct career pathway impacts, but career benefits were reported widely across interviewed alumni. So I ended up grouping the types of career benefits into 2 different categories. Skills and knowledge acquisition was mentioned the most by alumni at 70%. So this mostly, again, refers to, skills and knowledge. I love these 2 quotes from a Creek Connected alum and a Watershed Alliance alum. The Creek Connected alum talks about how they were able to develop social skills and planning skills, which later led them to lead a successful career in the sales field. So even though they're not working in education or science, they're continuing to use the skills that they developed through the internship. And a similar situation to the Watershed Alliance quote below. So this person at the time of their interview noted that they were working towards a PhD degree. So they mentioned that having the education background that Watershed Alliance gave them allowed them to apply to a more teaching-focused master's degree program where they were able to get a teaching assistantship for their master's degree. In addition to skills and knowledge acquisition, workplace community was also mentioned frequently by alumni, by around 30% of alumni. And this could refer to connections with coworkers, community members, but more often than not, it was talking about program supervisors and staff members. So these two quotes from Watershed Alliance alumnus and an Alarm alumnus talk about their program directors in detail. The Alarm alumnus talked about how their program director talked about how they made them feel like a professional. And even with their title as Watershed Coordinator, it made them feel like they were doing really important work. And then the Watershed Alliance alumnus, similar situation with that too. Their program director and the staff member taught them a whole lot of valuable skills. And then just talking with them about their careers as environmental educators was really helpful to them. All right, so moving into discussion next. So overall research findings were consistent with what was found in previous literature. Again, even though the Larson paper that I mentioned on this slide here, we utilized some of the previous findings to inform our codes. This trend of science of outreach programs, of alumni entering fields related to their outreach programs is consistent across other papers too. In addition, the mention of skill development, knowledge acquisition, as well as career networking were also frequently cited in other papers. And then one interesting note to make here, so time and internship program did not influence the overall impact in Watershed education alumni. So this is inconsistent with other studies. In fact, most of these other studies found the longer amount of time that an intern spent in a program, the more impact that they reported overall. And this just wasn't the case with Watershed education alumni. Regardless of whether they interned for 2 semesters or 8 semesters, they typically reported the same level of impact. In addition, academic and personal impacts also came up less compared to career impacts. Again, all alumni talked about some form of career impact, whereas those academic and personal came up a lot less often. And this might just be due to structural differences with Watershed education programs. So for instance, our programs were academic year. They were taking place during the school year. All programs were also paid, whereas some of the outreach programs that were explored in the other papers were volunteer-based and didn't compensate students. So those might explain some of those differences. In addition, there has been some previous research on internships that have found that paid opportunities or opportunities that compensated through academic credit have been found to lead to more career impacts in those that participate compared to unpaid opportunities. And then lastly, internships did appear to be transformative for some alumni, but not all. So not all alumni reported direct career impacts. However, a lot did report general career benefits. Again, that's skills and knowledge acquisition, the networking piece. And overall, alumni did just respond to their experiences differently. And this was surprising, especially for alumni who reported working in related fields post-graduation. It is critical, though, to note that all alumni career journeys were unique. And even though they all worked in larger education internship programs, alumni ultimately responded to their experiences differently. And just to talk a little bit about some of the implications of future research directions for this work. So in future research, I would love to consider those who had less desirable experiences in their programs. Most of the alumni that responded reported positive experiences. So it would be interesting to see if those who had less desirable experiences saw similar career pathway impacts. In addition, I would also like to look a little bit more into the senior student participants. Again, class standing at end of internship was the only demographic variable that appeared to have a relationship with that level of impact reported. So seeing whether or not, that can make a difference in recruiting, et cetera. And then in terms of how this may aid future research implications for programs. So this research is thought to inform intern recruitment and retention for directors. So they may use these findings to shape their own programs and inform their own recruitment strategies. In addition, it could also inform the decision-making of future undergraduate intern educators, or even just those that are interested in doing some sort of internship in the future. And then with that, I have a couple of acknowledgements. So I'm going to shout out my funding sources here. Of course, the internship programs as well. Going back to funding real quick, I did receive a generous Heiser Graduate Award to fund travel out to the Q Connections and Alarm sites, as well as just all the people that were there along the way with this. And then, of course, special shout out to all of the programs too and all of the alumni that participated. And with that, I can take any questions.